and Dr. Jane Morgan back with us this hour. Good to have all of you in. Bill, let me start with you. Democrats at these town halls want their elected officials to do something, get dirty. What do they want them to do in the minority?
Well, what they don't want them to continue doing is standing on the grass outside of the Capitol building, holding news conferences in which they simply rail against Republicans. Those are kind of worthless efforts on the part of Democrats. I don't think voters quite know what they want Democrats to do either, because we know the administration has just basically consumed all the oxygen in the air. But I think if you watch what Bernie Sanders and AOC are doing in their town meetings out there, where they're attracting thousands of people, they're talking in very concrete terms, saying we've got to fix the economy. That's the most important issue of the day today. They're not talking about, is democracy in danger or not? It might be, but that's just not where they're headed. They want their voters to start talking about the voters want the politicians to start talking about the real everyday issues that face them.
And I think when we talk about the physiologic responses, right, we talk about flight or fight, but there are two others. There's the fawning and there's the freezing. And so the fawning is when you sort of capitulate and try to appease the threat. And then the freezing is when you're sort of overwhelmed by all of the stressors coming at once and you sort of do nothing. And I think what the Democrats are complaining about is that they're seeing a little bit more freezing and they really want to see that fight. But there really are. It's fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and it appears that the Democrats are overwhelmed.
Yeah, a lot of Democratic voters were angry at Chuck Schumer for deciding to go along with vote for the continuing resolution.
The capitulation. That's right.
He was in Democrats were in a terrible spot with that, but a lot of people said, go ahead and risk it. Yes, if you shut down the government, you may pay a price, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity to strike back at the administration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are saying they need to get some guts, they need to get some backbone, they need to see something. And I think that people are feeling let down, like they're being abandoned by Democrats and not being forceful enough. And I think that people are still reeling from the disarray leading up to November. That just trying to figure out what to do, who's the candidate, what's the convention going to look like. And I think you're seeing an aftermath of that now, Victor, of people are like, what in the world? And will we ever get out of this turmoil?
Yeah, something that is really worrying to a lot of people, and this is not just limited to one party or the other, is that the White House's reaction response to Judge Boasberg and his order as it relates to those flights of, as the administration claims, members of Tren de Aragua, Venezuelans who are in this country, to El Salvador. The judge ordered to turn those planes around, and he says he's going to get to the bottom of whether his order was defied. And who defied him. But some of the rhetoric that's coming from the president calling for impeachment and the attorney general saying that this was overreach and there should be no judicial oversight of this use of the act.
First of all, it goes back to when we were all growing up as kids in civics, the three branches of government. We're actually seeing this in action now. Do we have a democracy? Will there be checks and balances? What is happening? The one branch is controlled. The executive branch is saying, I'm not listening. And then you have the judiciary, which is supposed to be a check and balance. And when you have one branch saying, I'm not going to obey that we are not going to do this, you cannot tell me what to do, that means that is a prescription, in my opinion, for some very, very serious problems. And I think this case with this plane and the order is just symptomatic of what I think is a major problem. And until we are clear that there have to be checks and balances and that there can be some repercussions for not following these orders, I think we're down a very, very difficult road here in this country.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about how we learned that in school, and we did. But young people, we no longer teach civics and that kind of government in school. So I wonder how much easier it is today for people who basically support Trump to disregard the three branches, the importance of the judiciary checking the executive, because it's never been built into what they learned growing up.
I hadn't thought about that, Bill. I hadn't thought about it from that angle.
Yeah, those are
but we are, if this country believes in democracy, if we say that we believe in democracy and that there cannot be one branch of government that controls everything, then we have got to step back and really rethink this. Now, the real test is going to be what happens when these orders are defied and what will be the power to put it in check. That's going to be the real question here in this country.
Dr. Morgan, let me ask you about, we got the latest numbers out of the number of measles cases across the country, now at 350, 309 as part of this Texas outbreak. And we've seen the politicization of vaccination. Does it help? Does it hurt for politicians to advocate for vaccines? I mean, we talked about this during the COVID era, of course.
You know, what people have to remember is when we're talking about herd immunity, the person who is unvaccinated is protected because the person in front of them is vaccinated, the person behind them is vaccinated, the person to the right of them is vaccinated, the person to the left of them is vaccinated. So they're in a cocoon of vaccinated people. And it's not that the unvaccinated have some special immune system or some special hierarchy to which they are responding and therefore are protected. No, they are protected because I got a vaccine and other people got a vaccine and they are surrounded. It's when those numbers start to break down when the person on the right of you also decides not to get the vaccine. And so now we start to have a breakdown, and measles is so highly contagious. There's something called the R0 value, meaning the R0 value of measles is 12 to 18. So for every one person, we expect 12 to 18 people to be infected. That's incredibly, incredibly contagious. For instance, if we look at chickenpox, it's less than 10. So when you have something that is that contagious, the herd immunity needs to be at least 95% of the population. You have to be completely surrounded. And we have now in the last couple of years dropped down to 92%, which is okay for chickenpox. It's not going to be okay for measles.
And people have to remember, people can die, and we have seen deaths already in this country.
Right.
But this is not just a childhood disease that, you know, the kids will get over. I mean, the potential of people dying is real.
It is, and we've seen one child and we've seen one adult, and the death rate of measles is generally 1 to 1,000. That is a very high death rate. And make no mistake, you can certainly get to herd immunity without vaccines. It merely requires that we expect a certain amount of death. We need to be able to tolerate death in order to get to herd immunity. That's what the vaccines do. We can get to herd immunity without the death rate.
The unfortunate part is that the Lubbock public health director says that the expectation is that this outbreak in Texas could last a year. And we're already at 305 in the first quarter of 2025. Let's talk about something we've been teasing all day. Financing your DoorDash. And this is the thing, is that we already put meals on credit cards, right? So it's not that, you know, unusual to finance a meal, but it really, I think, puts some vulnerable people and college students into a space where they could go into debt very quickly by paying an extra, you know, whatever the percentage interest rate is on a burrito.
Yeah, I was thinking about the fact that I get from the food delivery service that we use in our house, I probably get 4 messages from them a day about what I need to be ordering on any given day. I'm afraid that's only going to go up if they think that I now can charge that delivery. But it's troubling. You just said it. I mean, debt in this country is so out of control already. And yes, you're right. People use credit cards when they go to a restaurant. But to add to that, as you say, younger people in dormitories and others who really don't have the income but want to get a meal into their house, our staggering debt is only going to get a little bit worse.
Right. Yeah. And when you start to become overwhelmed, especially the younger you are and the less ability you have with coping mechanisms, then you start to disconnect. And we see this disconnection then of younger and younger and younger people. And when you are disconnected, especially with social media, you have the ability to be drawn in to these other rabbit holes. And we've seen that, especially with males, with the disconnection or being disaffected. And so all of these things are connect the dots. We have to make certain that we understand how all the dots connect to impact our society as a whole.
All right. Dr. Dre Morgan, Judge Glenda Hatchett, Bill Noggett. Fantastic conversation. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Victor.
Thanks,
Thank
Vic.
you.
All right. We'll take a
Victor.
quick break and we'll be back.